Welcome to Fans of the Forge. Today's wrap-up is for Season 5, Episode 5, the Kabyle Flyssa episode. I'm Chris.
I'm Sean.
And today we don't have Teresa, our other co-host, my wife. She's off at camp. But we do have a guest today. We have Collin. I'm sorry, I just like totally blanked on your name, but Collin Sage, the winner of this episode, is calling in via Skype right now. So welcome, Collin.
What's up? What's up? I'm here. I'll give a running commentary. Don't worry, I'll fix all the boo-boos or whatever. You know.
Well, we appreciate you calling in. It was really short notice, and when I posted that on Instagram saying, "Hey, you want to do an interview," I didn't actually expect anybody, for you to get right back to me, say, "Hey, sure, I'll check you out and see what's going on." So we appreciate it, man.
Heck yeah. Thank you guys for having me.
So let's get right into it. Round one. First, we'll introduce everyone that was on. Obviously, Collin was on it. And at the time, you had 5 years of part-time experience.
Mm-hmm.
You still doing part-time?
Yeah, I'm still doing part-time because as much as I love blades, I also like health insurance and like a 401k and things like that. So I kind of doubt I'll ever be full-time. Maybe when I retire.
Yeah. Just
because that steady paycheck, I have a really good job right now, so it's kind of hard to be like, I'll just give all that up for,
Right.
Maybe some people will buy some stuff. It's also hard on the other end when I get a ton of orders or interest and people are coming at me. It's like, I can maybe work on stuff like an hour or two a day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's slow going for sure, but
all right, cool.
For money.
So the other contestants in this episode was Bob, who had 17 years of part-time experience, Daniel, who was 15 years of full-time experience, and Jesse, who had 6 years of part-time experience. So based on the numbers here, which is how we normally would make our picks on an episode, we would have picked you maybe to be the underdog pick. And we're going to revisit the underdog term with you when we get near the end of the episode. So for round one, you guys had to salvage metal from a cannon, and there was multiple different metals there that you had to use at least two of. And basically you had to either do a Damascus or San Mai, or you had to combine two metals to make your blade. The parameters were 12 inches to 15 inches of your blade length, and then 22-inch overall length, including the tang. So, some of the notes we had. You and Jesse started off going for that cannon, the barrel of the cannon itself.
Right.
And you used the grinder to cut that piece off. And then once you got the piece off, Jesse abandoned you and went with the spike.
Oh, man, yeah.
And then you finally were able to cut it in half just to find out that the thing was hollow, right? Was that
right? It wasn't a real cannon, and I figured that going in, but I still assumed that the barrel would at least be like a solid hunk of metal.
Yeah.
And it looked like it was just laminated pieces together, and they didn't really show it, but by the time I had figured all that out, whatever, got my main piece of metal in the forge, like I had dropped off like 45 minutes to an hour or something like that.
Damn.
So I was way behind and freaking out because then I finally get this piece and it's just useless. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be that guy where they're going to be like, why is he cutting that up? What an idiot. What's the time?
So well, you managed to pull it together, and I did take note of a couple of the little highlights. Instead of a San Mai, you ended up doing a San Maybe. That was a good one. That was a good quote you had there. And then you talked about having to shake off that ash and get to work, and it was good.
Well, and that I like how you were like, flux is glue, right? Flux is glue.
Right. I thought, going in, there was a couple things I wanted to do. One, I wanted to make it past the first round, which I didn't think I was going to do. I was like, if I can just do that, I'll feel okay about myself. Two was I have to be so personable. They have to bring me back. Even if I suck at bladesmithing, they're going to have to bring me back. And what a lot of people don't know is I actually have a degree in theater arts. And at one point I was going to be an actor. And I've done like videography and worked on films and stuff like that behind the scenes. And so I was very comfortable working that camera, and I was like, man, I'm going to work this thing. So even if I look like an idiot out there, maybe I look like a lovable idiot in here, and then they'll bring me back on. I don't know. That was my hope.
You did a pretty good job. Like, you really hammed it up.
Yeah, the initial strut that you had coming out to the
oh man,
introduced you.
I came out doing that, and I immediately hear, like, you don't see anything beforehand. You maybe get like a quick tour of the shop. You don't see the judges. You just walk out, and they're there, and Will's there, and you go. And so I come out doing that, just like trying to pretend like I'm not crapping my pants, like nervous. And I just hear Dave groan, and it's like, oh God, he's like, one of these guys. One of these kind of guys. And I was like, oh no. I was like, that totally backfired.
Well, you know what? They didn't play it off as having backfired when they put it together on the episode. Right. They really highlighted your confidence coming out. And even with the interviews with you and stuff after the actual round and stuff is over, like, they really highlighted where you were at your strongest, like coming out with these little quips here and there, or just whatever you were saying. Like, they were just kind of
hair is Will Willis going to have this time.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I liked that they put in the jokes, but I was watching it and I was like, man, they really just took all the parts where I look super cocky, and they cut out all the parts where I was like, I'm gonna lose. I'm gonna lose so bad. About half of me talking in those interviews was like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is gonna suck. and so we're watching it, and my family turns to me and they're like, man, you're really cocky. I thought you were nervous going into it. And I was like, it's not me. So I get why they did it, and I'm not upset, but it was interesting to see how they did that.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's always interesting to see how the final edit comes together after you record something like that.
And speaking of that, I know, like, so there's a scene where Will's like, I hate camp knives. It's just like whatever. And then it cuts to you like, I'm gonna make a camp knife. It's like, so was that like real time at all? Like, did you hear him say that, or is that just edited?
No. And I think that was one of the more times they probably thought up something on the side to say instead of being more organic. But you really can't hear them when you're in there. It's so loud. Just even the forges going, regardless of the power hammer or the presses, like you can't hear anything. And I had headphone or earplugs in, and so I would like try to make a joke with the judges, thinking like, oh, we're gonna have little quips or whatever, and they would just look at me like, what? When I did the Flux's glue thing, they all were just like, what? And so I was like, well, that didn't land, and I guess somebody had to tell them what I said. So it was really interesting. Like, even when you get kind of close on like the drill press, it's still really hard to hear them.
Yeah.
But
okay, so let's continue here. So the other note that we had was you did your quench on your blade with about 30 minutes left, and then you kind of were able to finish up doing whatever you could at that point to just be done with round one. We had some other notes on the other contestants. So Bob, they made a big point to talk about how he had quenched his blade without doing any thermocycling prior to that. And that then Ben, as the judging went on, kind of brought that back in when his test ended up, he broke right on the first hit.
I like how they don't show anyone else really doing thermocycling in the episode before they quench.
Right.
Which is typical. So I don't know. Does that happen? Were you doing that, or was anyone else doing
that? I didn't have enough time. I mean, I wanted to do like clay, the back, and that kind of, I was just like, there's no time for any of this. And I quenched twice. They didn't show it.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't tell if it was hard, and I was so nervous. I was like, whatever, do it again. So yeah, it was interesting to see that, because I was like, I didn't do it. I don't know if the other guys did it. You're kind of tunnel vision.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think they just make it a point to insert that, and then, oh look, his blade breaks later.
Right. So, it might have been why his blade broke.
It could be,
I don't know.
But
like, I know why mine sort of did. There was some kind of crack or something underneath my Sanmai.
Right.
And so I couldn't see it, they couldn't see it, and so it was like really like, oh my gosh. you know.
Yep. So what other notes we have? So Daniel, he was off to a running start. He was almost done with an hour and 15 minutes left. Like, he had a really nice looking blade. He did his quench and found 3 pretty bad cracks along the cutting edge. And so he abandoned it and started over with an hour and 15 left and managed to pull out a pretty respectable blade for that last for 1 hour's time of being able to put that together. Like, that was really impressive on his part, I gotta say. And that's about all.
I found him over by one of the fans, and he was waving a blade, trying to like slowly cool it down. And I was like, "Oh man, that looks really good. It looks way better than mine." He was like, "Well, it's my second one," and I was like, "What?" And it started to sink in, like, "Oh man, I'm so out of my league right now." But I think, not to take away from him, but I found that when I was just working my high carbon, it went really fast. But when I tried to do the San Mai, it just like demolished the blade, made this giant nasty banana thing, and it took forever to get it. You know, that's where my time got eaten up.
Right. Because
they don't really show this, but there's only one power hammer. So when you're like forge welding, you've got a very slim time, and then you just keep looking over and people are on it. So I went over to the press, and the press just like, I was like, no! And you try to flip it over and do it the other way, and it just, got this giant potato chip thing.
Oh, geez.
And I was freaking out. I was like, oh my gosh.
So finishing off round 1, the notes we had for Jesse, he ended up using the same material that you did for the most part, although he waited till pretty much the last second to implement his second metal as the guard, rather than doing a full San Mai. And then from there, moving on to the judging, they had was that the... Oh, no, that was just the judging. So basically, they looked at Bob's as a thick handle. Daniel's was looking good. Jesse's was really rough. Not really a finished blade compared to everybody else's. And then, they commented you had a really good blade shape with yours. And the only thing was you kind of need to refine your handle a little bit at that point. This is the end of round 1. And from there, because Jesse's was the roughest of all of them, just not quite as far along as everyone else, he ended up getting the boot. And you moved on to round 2 alongside Daniel and Bob.
Yay.
That was good.
Yay.
So
it was yay then too. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it.
So round 2, I don't know if you want to talk about round 2, Sean.
Yeah, so let's see. With yours, judges had a concern about the long weld when you took the can pieces and put them on the tang to kind of beef it up. You're like, oh, he's got a really long weld there. Might, the heat might make it really, unstable. It's like, yeah, okay. Something.
It was really far away from the edge. I wasn't worried about it, but whatever, drama.
Yep, exactly. And then Bob kind of comedically had his belt speed turned way down, so whenever he's sanding, the belt kept flying off, and he couldn't get metal shaved off, and then he finally took a while for him to realize, oh wait, it's turned down to like 20%, so then he cranks it up and everything's good. So and then he finished with an hour left and just chilling. Just sat down.
Yeah, I told him he should do that. I mean, he probably was going to do it anyway. I'm not taking credit, but he was like, I got an hour. I told him, I was like, you need to call for coffee and a magazine because Kirk did that. And he's like famous for it. He didn't win, but he's still like famous. I was like, if you can do that, like you can be the next Ray.
He looked like Ray too.
He was like, yeah. I don't think maybe he got a drink, but
I think he had some water or something.
Yeah, or something. Yeah. And I was like, dang, there he goes. But at the same time, I was like, he just kind of paracord wrapped his. Yeah. I saw his blade. It was really rough. Like he didn't even get all the hammer marks out.
Yeah.
But he didn't do it like Daniel. It was kind of purposeful. It was like the hammer marks were in a very specific way.
Yeah. It looked really cool.
I was like, Daniel's was like, well, I'm not going to beat him in this because he's got one of the nicest knives I've ever seen on the show. Mm-hmm. Like, it was I was like, oh my gosh. And then, so I was like, well, Bob's doesn't look great and they hate paracord. So I was like, if I can just perform the same as Bob, I think I will win in that. But I was still, I was nervous all the way through. But I felt a lot better in round 2. It was, things kind of went my way.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You're just cruising along. It was like, oh, this is fun now, instead of stressful.
Were you dancing at one point while you were grinding? Was that they made a comment?
Yeah. Yeah. Try again, that kind of like, I got to try to pretend like I'm confident, even though. And there's, to my critique or criticisms they didn't show was when my knife broke, Ben also like looked at my knife and was like, these are some really strange grind patterns here. He's like, your profile is kind of strange. And he was like, it looks like you were nervous in your grind. And I was like, how did you know? Because when I was grinding, all these thoughts go through your head like, I've done this a million times, but this is not going to be good enough. And so I just started grinding, I don't even know, in a weird way. And it was funny that he commented on that. He was like, looking down the profile now that it's broken, it looks like you were like really afraid and like left some like this round meat in the middle. And I was like, yeah, probably. I was terrified that it was going to break.
Yeah.
And then that's what I ended up doing. So.
Well, the testing was the ramrod chop. That was all that ended up happening for the testing there.
So Bob goes first, and on the first hit, his blade broke, which was, I'm sure, devastating for Bob.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And did that, so you said, like, I was worried my blade was going to break. When you saw that happen, was it just like, holy shit, is this going to be me next?
Absolutely. For one, I was like, oh, for a second I had a thought, this is awesome. I'm basically going to move on, because it was like one hit. So I was like, there's no, I've got this now. But then immediately I was like, oh man, that could be me in 2 seconds. And I was basically waiting for it. I was like, I know that's going to be me for some, I just knew it. I don't know what, I had no idea it was going to do that, but I was just like, man.
Who went next? Was it Daniel that went
Daniel
next?
went next.
He got through it all. No major issues with that. And then it was on to you, and yours broke on the third hit. And
like you said, it was for like a crack that had formed
during the heat treat.
Right. Underneath of the San Mai weld.
Okay.
So it was like, it was like an internal crack. And he said you could tell because of the way you could see burned steel like in the center, but not on the edges. And I was like, man, that's crazy. Like 1 in a million.
Mm-hmm. But
so
they gave it to you, and Bob had to go because his didn't complete the test as far as yours did. So, So you move on with Daniel.
Yeah. And that leads us to round 3, where you guys had to recreate the Kabyle Flyssa. I think I'm saying that right. They kind of said that a few different ways on the show.
I thought I heard cable.
Well, then they said it was the traditional sword of the Kabyle Berbers, but they spelt it the exact same way, like in the closed captioning. I was like, I don't know. So it was an interesting looking sword design. The fact that it had the 2-inch wide at the base, then tapered, and then flared back to 2 inches, then tapered again at the point. Like I could see, you could tell on your guys' faces, like, oh my gosh, what the heck is this that they're making us do?
I was so devastated. So a couple interesting little tidbits. So my knife breaks, right?
Yes.
I'm really devastated about that. I'm like, man, I don't deserve to be in the final. I just don't deserve to be here, rules aside or whatever. And then somewhere in between there, in that little bit of time before we go back out for the reveal of the sword, I find out Daniel had his own show on History Channel where he like makes knives like from scratch, and he's like, oh yeah, well, we also make flintlock rifles, and I like hand bore out the barrels and carve everything myself. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And then we walk out and I see the cloth is a really long thing.
Right.
And they ask you in the like getting on the show interviews, they're like, could you handle doing a long sword at home if that happened? I guess because they don't want to send somebody home and it's impossible for them to do it.
Right.
So I was like, I basically said, not really, don't give me a long sword. And they were like, okay. So then I see that thing, and then he's like, whoa, look at this super long, thin sword. And I was just like, just like utter defeat. I was for sure that I was just going to go home, waste 5 days, and just come back just to lose. And I was like, oh man, I'm just going to go and lose. And then I broke a knife, so I'm just going to look like a fool out here. It was rough.
So the quick rundown of those 5 days for you guys. Oh, one other spec was that you guys had to do an animal head icon on the pommel of the handle itself. So they didn't really show Daniel much for his 5 days. They mentioned a little bit of him doing some work, and then by day 3 he quenched it, had a little issue with some warping, but it was a warp that he didn't think he would be able to fix. So he just left it, and I suppose it wasn't as bad a warp as they kind of made it seem. If he said it was okay, just run with it, then it couldn't have been too badly warped.
Yeah.
And then from there, for him at least, they skipped to day 5 where he was working originally on a dragon head for his handle, and then decided to switch, make a handle out of wood and carve an eagle head on there. But they didn't really show him much. And we've come to figure out over watching all these episodes and doing the wrap-ups that when they don't show you, usually that's a good thing. Usually that means that there was no real major issues during the process of making the weapon. So compared to, not to say they were showing a lot of you, but they showed a lot of your day 1 through 5. Now, you had to start off by cutting your forge in half just so you could even work on it, right?
Right, because there's a bowl, so if you have a long piece, it goes down in the bowl at an angle, and then you can't get the whole thing hot, because how are you going to get the middle in there?
Right.
So I just chop it up. They didn't show it, which I was surprised, but I was super sick the whole time. I got home, because that was the next day. Like, we flew in, and I got home at like 6 p.m., and they were like, hey, we're going to be there at 8 a.m., like, get ready.
Oh my God.
I didn't have anything ready. I didn't have any extra steel. I didn't have any charcoal. I didn't have anything. And then I was like,
this is my last piece of metal here. And I'm like, oh, what?
Right. Well, they send you home with some kind of metal, like a recommended, but you don't have to use that.
Okay.
And that's with everybody. So me and Daniel used the same steel. But other than that, I was like, if I screw that up, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have time to do anything else. And I was so sick. The first day, I had to keep like laying down in the grass because I was going to pass out or vomit. So I was really surprised they cut like any mention of that.
Oh, yeah.
And I probably didn't start feeling better till like day 4.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was so sick. So that I was like, man, surely they're going to talk about that because it's like drama. But for whatever reason, they didn't mention it. So
interesting. All right.
Yeah.
No.
What else did we have here? So
day 2, you had some issues with the blade thickness.
Yes, it was like they basically will send everybody, if you make it to the end, home with some kind of steel. They gave us these rods. It's like, oh, you can use this if you want, basically, or you can use whatever you want. Who cares? So I was using that piece, and it was like, it was just barely enough steel to get that like 2 inches wide, to where the blade is getting really thin, like to 1/8 of an inch on the spine, or maybe even less. And I was freaking out. I was like, oh man, this is getting like crazy thin. Like, I would like it to be this thin at the final point, but if I'm going to quench and it's that thin.
Right.
Like, so I don't know. It was really, really stressful trying to, and it pushed me because normally I'll be like, well, if I'm feeling insecure about this or worried that it's going to do something bad in the quench, I'll just leave it a little thick, but I couldn't do that here. So I'm basically just having to get in there and just forge it. I don't know. Like, it was like, this is my test. This is my challenge to forge something so perfectly. There was like no room for error.
Right.
And you hopped on your horse.
What's that?
You hopped on your horse.
Oh yeah, I forgot all about that until they showed it on TV. I was like, oh my gosh.
I put out a little request for questions to see if there was anybody that followed us on Instagram that wanted to ask you a question. And one of the questions was what was the name of your pet rocking horse, and do you still ride it?
I wish I could think of something really clever right now, but the rocking horse probably had a name at some point. That's like the garage is full of a bunch of crap, and that was childhood rocking horse just still sitting in there, and it doesn't have a name, not that I can think of. I'm sorry. Yeah, I will. I still ride it from time to time.
See, I feel
look out on Instagram because I've been meaning to post some videos of me and the horse.
There you go. I feel like that's something I would do if I had that and I was on the show, and there was just that horse just hanging out. I'd be like, you know what? I'm gonna go hang out on the horse for a little bit. I'm gonna say something clever like, you know what, man? I gotta clear my mind. You know what does it for me though? I just got to take my horse out for a ride, and I'm just cutting the legs. Yeah, that makes sense.
Perfect.
I'm better now. Okay, I can focus now.
I should have said that. That was one of the few times I actually had like fun on those 5 days, because there was a lot of jokes in the studio, but when I was at home, it was like I am exhausted. I don't have anything clever to say. At one point, at the very end of my the start of day 5, I was drilling holes to put the pins in the handle, and it wasn't drilling through, and I burned through 5 drill bits, and I was freaking out. And then the cameraman gets in your face and he's like, how are you feeling in this moment? Tell me what you're feeling. And I like those guys a lot, but I was like, dude, you need to get out of my face right now. And I was like, I'm sorry that I'm so angry with you right now. We'll be friends later, but get out of my face. And I was so mad. And he's like, oh, so it was good to have it over with, but man, that was stressful.
So we did have one other note, is that you had to dig a trench to do your heat treat, and I know that you've posted at least a few things on Instagram since then of you using the trench. Now, is it still there, or have you retired the trench?
It's still there. That on Instagram I had to redig it, which the second time was better, because I wasn't on the time clock.
Sure.
And the first time was I cleared out all the roots the first time. I was like, I got to dig this trench. There's no trees around, and there's these massive roots. I'm just like, I got no time. It was like a heat wave. This was back in September we filmed.
Okay.
And it was good all those days until the quench day, and then it was 90 degrees.
Oh.
And I was just like, I hate everything. This isn't. I didn't think it was gonna work. At all. There was I was kind of getting in arguments with the producer. I was like, if this doesn't work, what do I do? If this doesn't work, what, do I just go on and lose? What happens? What happens if you can't quench a blade?
Right.
And he didn't have he's like, I don't know. That's never happened before. And I was just like, so, yeah, I had a stand-up fan. I just kind of laid down on the ground to kind of blow oxygen onto the thing. That whole thing melted, shot back, and that was melting. And you can't really see it because there's not a lot of flames, but it was so hot. I almost passed out into it.
Oh no.
You can sort of see it in the episode, but I had a little magnet because it was so bright you couldn't see the colors, so I had to test to see if it was past critical temperature. And I reached in with my magnet, and the heat was so much, and I pulled the sword out, and then the sword fell, and I tripped.
Oh my god!
And then I was like, oh no, I don't have another chance at this, and I had to pick it up off the ground. And stick it in the thing. Yeah. And there was a part I thought they were going to put in. I lit that trench quench with gasoline because I was totally out of lighter fluid, and my blowtorch was dead. So I started dumping gasoline on it, and I was like, "You see this, boys? This is Kentucky. Here we go!" And I even did the gasoline a line and lit it and let it go. Woo. And the producer was like, "Oh, this is awesome. This is going sure." And I was like, "Yeah." Didn't make it.
Oh man.
Oh wow. But I would love to see some of that footage. I'm sure that was pretty cool.
Make it a 2-hour long episode. Put the good stuff in there.
Yeah, right.
I would sign, man, if I could have that footage and just sign a thing no one will ever see this. I'd love to do that, but I know that'll never happen.
So you just mentioned something from a technical standpoint that I was not aware of. We have no experience, by the way. Like, we've never done it. We actually are taking a blacksmithing class on Monday, like our first blacksmithing class, just to get in there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But so you mentioned using the magnet. So how does the magnet work when you're trying to figure out if it's the right temperature?
To get so when it has to quench, it has to be at critical. What's that called? Critical temperature, which is when steel basically is about 1500, 1550. I think somebody's gonna tell me I'm wrong when they can Google it. Basically, the steel becomes like a super plastic. The carbon starts to free float inside the steel, and once that happens, that's when you quench. The carbon will realign itself, and that's how you get like brittleness. But it has to get to that point, because if not, you need the carbon to be free floating at about that. And so when it does do that, it loses its magnetism.
Oh, okay.
So you can touch it with a magnet and it won't stick, right. And that's when you're, right about there.
Gotcha.
So and you can sort of tell in the colors, if you were somewhere dark, but when it's bright and sunny, I couldn't see. The blade doesn't look like it has any color in it. Even though it could be, close to melting, it's that sunny. So yeah, I just had to reach in there. I went and bought one of those little things. I didn't have a big magnet, so I was like, I gotta find a magnet. And I got that little thing you put under your car and put the key in.
Oh yeah.
That was the only magnet I could find. So I was like trying to like touch it with that. And I was like, I don't know if it's stuck or not. I don't know. It's so hot. Just put it in.
And then the vertical quench tube that you used actually worked pretty well for you, right? Like having it be vertical kept it from bending side to side or up and down like in a normal horizontal quench, like with something that long and thin at least, right?
Right. I actually had a slight warp too, because it can still go like side to side, like curl up, kind of like a potato chip.
Sure.
But yeah, I was worried it was so thin and long that it would like bend, like curve or katana back, or something like that would happen. So the vertical quench, it helps with that for sure.
Okay. So, moving into the last little section of the show here, the testing. Sean, you want to run through the testing?
All right. So we have the keel test from U.S. Staff Sergeant Chris Mash, who was subbing for Doug. And what was that?
It was the ballistics dummy.
Oh yeah, that's right, the dummy. Yeah. That dummy's got messed up.
Yeah, those swords were brutal on that dummy.
Yeah.
Dude, that he freaked me out. Doug was like, well, he didn't have the sling on, and so I didn't know he was hurt. And they didn't tell us. And then he was like, well, I'm going to test your sword, but there's a problem. And then he left a long pause, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I did something wrong, and I'm finished." And he like long pause, and then finally was like, "I can't test it. That's the problem. Here's this guy." And I was like, "What?" We had no idea any of that would happen. And then I asked somebody later, and they were like, "Oh yeah, well, it's been going on for a while, but it hasn't aired yet." I was like, "Thanks for telling us. We're up there freaking out."
Right.
He was like, I want to test these swords, but there's a big problem, guys. And I was like...
That's Doug for you.
Yeah, well, I guess that's all of them, because usually...
They like doing that, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if Nielsen's like, oh, we have a problem here. Because he's done that seriously when there was a problem. When they couldn't shoot that thing out of the cannon.
Oh, yeah. That was
like, we have a serious problem here. It's like, all right, bro, like, take it down.
They would say that stuff even like kind of off camera. They kind of mess with you a little bit. I was like, man, you guys, you're dirty. And those Will Willis pauses when he's like, the champion is, it's way longer in real life.
Oh yeah, I have to imagine.
Yeah, it's like double the time.
They're probably trying to get reaction shots for everybody as he's saying it, and
right.
Oh,
so it's just like, oh my gosh.
Test 2.
But those dummies, back to the dummies, he was attacking those, I wasn't really worried about it at the time, but then when he started getting into it, it's, he stuck it in, and then he just started to twist and like kind of just pull sideways out of the dummy. And I was like, and from the angle I was at, you could see it better than the camera. There, huge flex getting it out of there, and I was freaking out. I was like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Do some good Doug cam in there too.
Yeah. So hashtag DougCam. Anytime Doug is not testing, but somebody else is testing for him, usually you see him in the background, and it's his face. And if you watch his face in those background shots, he's always got a huge grin. He's like, yeah.
He's so into it, dude. He's out of focus, but you can tell he's got this big grin on his face.
So we always try to highlight those moments of Doug just in the background with this little smile as they disembowel the dummy.
Yeah. And
then they had the terracotta pot smash. Now that test was one where you could see how when Ben was swinging them and hitting those pots, you could see them like flexing quite a bit as he was hitting the pots. Like you could really get a good idea of how thin those blades actually are and how much flex there actually was to them during usage, at least.
Right.
But
you had no problem with yours. Yours, from what we saw, went right through, and Ben said, "Yeah, you did a good job,"
which blew my mind because he again that like TV pause. He's sitting there feeling it, and it was covered in dust, so I couldn't see anything. And I was like, "Oh, that had to have messed up my edge." And he's got this look on his face, like, Anyway, it's great. I love it. It's like, oh.
And so this test, for Daniel's kill test, he did a good job too, but they made a comment his handle was really small. And then that small handle basically came back for each of the tests. They mentioned it was really hard to control his sword because the handle was more of a knife handle than it was a sword handle. And from the terracotta pot smash, he also had a little bit of edge damage on his blade. So at this point, when they said that, did you feel like I have a chance here? Like I might be able to really actually take the whole contest and win it? Or
that was like, it was starting to build in me. I think I came in. Well, I didn't think. Well, I came in thinking I want to redeem myself. Even if I lose, I want to just show that I made a really good, effective weapon. And so I was more pleased that like I was doing good rather than like, oh, am I going to beat Daniel? And I didn't think, looking in hindsight, it was kind of clear, if I would have been outside the situation, I would have been like, oh yeah, I probably got this. But in the moment, right up into the end, I had no real idea.
Yeah.
Because they cut out a lot of that judging too, which I get why they did it, but a lot of it was just interesting, I thought. When Dave did his test, he found the balance point on both of our swords and like held it and balanced it and talked a lot about balance and what forward weight does, and talked a lot about the handle and the pommel and counterbalance and all this stuff. And they kind of cut a lot of that. And I was like, oh man, that was a really interesting part. So there was, and they kind of cut some criticisms and some positive things from both of us.
Okay.
A little bit. So I think, looking back, I think they did it maybe to make it seem a little more close because, and no offense against Daniel whatsoever, his sword was way more beautiful and I think better crafted than mine. He just was so out of balance. I think it was maybe even a little more than they were kind of leading on.
Okay.
And you can really see it when they had it there. Like it was also because he had his belly was way up front.
Yep.
And so, you could see it when they held it, you could see it. So like in hindsight, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll probably win just on performance. But in the moment I was like, man, his blade looks killer.
Right.
I feel like it's way more clean than mine, like all this stuff. So I was like, man, he's got it in the bag. I felt.
I think another point they said was like the pommel wasn't very big, so the hand could just kind of slide.
Oh yeah, like they said that
holding it on.
His handle might have been a little more salvageable if his animal at the end had been larger to help keep the hand from sliding off the end.
Right.
So
his beak on his bird was also broken off.
Oh really?
When we came in, it was like that, and he was like, what the heck? Mm-hmm. And then my animal head, which I'll get to that in a second, was totally rusted over. And I was like,
Oh my
What
gosh.
happened? Like nobody could. I get why they didn't. They probably were like, well, this is how it came. It probably happened in shipping. They're like, we're not going to touch it up for him. But it was still like disappointing. Like, oh man, and he was like, my beak. And so, because it was about a month from the time we finished the 5 days to the time we went back, it was a little over a month.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure they had been sitting around for a while.
Right.
And I was like, man, I should have taken more steps to protect the anti-rust, but oh well.
So, with that, after all the testing, they announced you were the winner. So, congratulations. I'm sure that was mind-blowing for you to be there and actually get that, Will Willis saying your name as the Fortune Fire champion.
Gosh, yeah.
And so that leads us to a question from Alex Ruiz, who was another Fortune Fire champion that we just interviewed last week or 2 weeks ago now, actually. Yeah. He's Volunteer Forge on Instagram. And he said to specifically ask you, what's the animal's head? An underdog, which is kind of what Will Willis also said at the end there. So please enlighten us.
Let's talk about this. Let's break this down.
All right.
So obviously in editing, they choose what they want to show. And I wish things were a little different, but I wasn't irked about anything. I thought it was all fine except for my animal head. That was the one thing I was like kind of upset about because it was a specific animal. It was a hippo. And I thought that was going to make the cut because I had to carve it last minute. There was some problems with that, and it just kind of happened. It wasn't a choice. I was like, I'm going to make a lion. Then like, oh man, I don't have enough metal here, kind of freaking out. And then I was like, oh, his teeth are kind of squared out. Like it's kind of got that shape. Like, oh man, yeah, it's going to be a hippo. This is great. We made a ton of hungry hippo comments in interviews. And I think what happened was, one, Will had that underdog line, and two, I made that joke at the beginning, like, you guys are going to have to guess, and that didn't come off the way I thought it was going to. Yeah, I was going to like, hey, let's play a game where you guys guess what it is. But looking back, it sounded like I have no idea what it is. I just kind of made something. But they cut every time one of the judges went up. They knew what it was, but they were messing with me because I said that. And like Dave was like, oh, Ben was like, it's a chupacabra, isn't it? And Doug was like, I think it's an alien, some kind of alien. And Dave said it was, I forget what he said. It's something dumb. And then, so they edited it cleverly because at the end, Will said, okay, guys, what'd you think it was? And they went back and said their things. And he was like, well, I think it was an underdog. And I was like, ha, ha, ha. And I was like, I hate all of you. You know it's a hippo. And they're all laughing. And so I was like, oh, this is going to make it for sure. So I'm so mad about that because, one, it made it look like I didn't know what I was doing. Two was after that, I rebranded myself as Hippo Head Forge because I thought that was going to be a big part of the episode was the hippo head. Because there was so much talk about it in the interviews and talking about it. And so I was like, yeah, this is going to be perfect. And then just like nothing, cut every mention of it. Even when they show the swords and it like swings by, they like swung by the pommel real quick. And like no one, they never looked at it. They never did a close up of it. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was so upset. And then so people afterwards were like, he didn't even make an animal. He just made something. He didn't follow the rules. And I was like, oh. So that's the only thing that I am upset about with my episode. The hippo justice. Hashtag hippo justice.
All right. We'll throw that in there.
Yeah, that'll be up there. We'll put that out there.
Okay.
But
did you get a Fortune Fire tattoo as promised on the episode?
Not yet. I can't believe I said that on air, so to speak, because I joked about that before, and I joked about it like off camera, and they were like, "Oh, you should say that," and I was like, "I can't say that because they're going to cut back to that if I go out first and be like, look at this idiot." So I said it anyway, and I was like, "Oh no." So I am going to get something. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get I was going to get something else, but then after the whole hippo and Kabyle thing, I think I'm going to get the Flyssa down.
Oh, okay.
Here like this.
Nice.
But I need I need time.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Dude, it's kind of a big piece, and the guy I want to do it is crazy booked forever. So it's kind of like I've been putting it off, and people keep asking me, like, hey, man, where's your tattoo? Let's see it. Let's see it. And I'm like, So one day, it's definitely on the books or whatever. It'll happen one day.
Just say it's on if people ask, just say it's on your butt and you can't show them.
Well, if it was on my butt, I'd probably show them.
At least you're honest about it. So, we had a few other notes. Let's see. They made a point to show when you were doing your quenches that you called it razzle dazzle. Is that something you do all the time, or was that just something they picked up on for the show?
No, this goes back to I wanted to make an impression really bad. So having been a huge fan of the show and knowing a lot about TV and editing and all that stuff, I know where the parts that will make promos, basically, the stuff. So I wanted to be in all the commercials. So I've got to say something cool or silly when I quench. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. Like I made sure to like turn and like let the flames blow out and like blow it at the cameras. And, I was like, cause I got to make the commercials, And so in a lot of the promos, whenever they talk about like the canon or something specific, I made sure to say something like big, quick, and, about the episode. And it worked because I made most of the commercials for the season.
Right.
When the season was about to start, at least. And I was like, oh, yeah, it totally worked. So, no, I don't normally say that. In my head, I'm more like, oh, shit, oh, shit, oh, shit.
Yeah, right. What else we got here? Did you do anything to prepare for the show?
Like before going there?
Okay. Let me unpack this as quick as I can. No. This is a little preemptive strike here. This is not to toot my own horn at all. I like before the show, I moved away from Louisville to Baltimore because I worked in theater, and you kind of got to travel for that. Building stuff, I was like a welder and a rigger and things like that. So I was living there for like a year. And then for like 6 months, all that summer before the show, I was like floating around the country, working all over the country, different places, right? And I had applied and I knew I was going on, but it just like somehow it went totally to the back of my mind. And so even before I applied, I hadn't forged anything in a long time, like 9 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I just didn't think about it, and I got wrapped up. Life was really crazy at the time, so I was like, whatever the show. So then, like, I was floating around the country, and then at one point I looked at the dates, and I was like, hey, boss, I got to leave this contract early because I got to go back to Louisville so I can fly out in like 3 days to go do this thing. And so I had like one day at home before I got on the plane, and it still hadn't hit me that it was going to, it just, I don't know why. So I get home and I was like, I should probably practice. And then I went out there and I was like, hitting. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to forge. And then I was like, how do I practice? I can't, with the equipment I have, doing a knife in 3 hours is not a legitimate thing.
Right.
Yep.
So then I just kind of gave up on that. And it hit me in waves. So I flew there. And it still didn't really hit me. And then the night before, I kind of was sitting there in bed and I realized I need to pick out what kind of knife I'm going to make. And then I was like, oh, crap. And then so I'm like, I pull up old episodes and I'm watching and I'm like, okay, camp knife, whatever, the easiest thing. I got to go simple. And then it still hadn't dawned on me that this is going to be like an intense, crazy experience. Again, I don't know why. And then the next morning we met up, all the contestants, before we went there, And immediately they start pulling out phones and like, oh, look at this thing I just finished and this thing. And Daniel's like, look at this, sea dragon I carved or something. And that's when it started to dawn on me like, oh my gosh, I'm so out of my league. These guys like have been breathing this and preparing for it and all this stuff. And then we got to the studio and they're just like, get out there. And you just like step out and Will Willis is like, all right, here we go. And it was like, oh. and there was a little bit where I was like, well, if I'm here to just have fun, right? I don't expect to win. I'm just going to have some fun. And, but then it started to dawn on me that, okay, you're having fun, but if you come out, and you go home bad, like you don't finish a knife in the first round or you break a knife, like if it's bad, like that could ruin you for a while, right. At least, that'll ruin your reputation. And then it started to dawn on me like, oh my gosh, I just kind of wandered in here thinking I'm going to have a good time. Yeah. But this could potentially like ruin my career in this. And then I just started to freak out. Like all through round one, I'm just freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I prepare? What have I been doing? What? And it showed. I think my knife was terrible. Looking back, even if it hadn't broke, I didn't think, the design was kind of poor. The handle was poor. It was all just kind of okay. So I really didn't buckle down. So when the sword challenge came around, it was like, okay, this isn't for fun anymore. Like I have to like take this as seriously as I can. And I still, basically scraped a win by. I'm under no illusions there. That Daniel is much better smith than me and has tons of experience and all this stuff. So, but I'm glad of all that because like my knife breaking, it sucks, but I'm glad because then when I went home after the show, I was like, that can never happen again. Right. And so I got in the time between we filmed the show and then it aired like 7 or 8 months. I was on it every day, like perfecting all my stuff, or not perfecting, but getting better every day. And so it really pushed me like, my knife was terrible. I kind of just scraped out a win. Like that's not going to happen again. And so I'm glad that happened in hindsight. Because it still kind of stinks to look back like, I didn't make a very good knife. Who's going to want to buy a knife from me? Right. They might want to buy a sword. Yeah. But, it's really pushed me to take everything to the next level. And so I'm kind of happy it happened that way, really.
Well, good. So now have you gotten a lot of like people requesting like custom stuff from you after you won?
I've mainly got a lot of people requesting late night rendezvous.
Oh,
really?
All right.
Yeah, here's the seedier side of Forged and Fired Champions. So I imagine most of those people watching this, I'm not upset at anybody. I'm just confused when it usually starts something like, hey, saw you on the show. I get a lot of that. Congrats. A lot of people, local people, and I'm like, heck yeah, because no one, I don't think from Kentucky has ever won. I'm pretty sure. I haven't watched a lot of season 5, so that might have changed. But at the time, I'm like 95% sure I was the first Kentucky winner, first time Louisville. So I was like really pumped. Anyway, so people would be like, hey, good job. And then they'd be like, hey, I'm right across the river, or like I'm right here, like we should get together one night or something. And I'm just like, I was unprepared. I was unprepared for that, for that level of stardom or what. A lot of times I reply, I'm just like, I'm just a regular dude. Like, even if people weren't being creepy, they were just like freaking out, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you responded to me. It's like, okay, I mean, you probably have more cool things going on in your life than me. Like, I'm just a regular guy. Like, I'm not some crazy superstar or anything. So, but for the most part, it's been really positive. A lot of people have want my work, which is great because even if like 5 people are like, hey, can I get a commission? That's like overwhelming for me because I work full time and I work hard full time. And so I get home and it's like, oh man, can I hit a piece of metal for like 30 minutes before it gets too dark, or something like that.
Right.
So it's kind of slow going, but it has been great, and I've loved all the fandom. I don't know. I guess I have fans. I guess. Thanks, guys.
Well, sounds
Thanks,
like
fans.
it for sure. Late night
Yeah.
rendezvous.
It's been really interesting sometimes, the stuff. Also, people will just hit you up and just ask you things or ask if you can make them something, and it's like it's just totally out of left field. Like they'll send you something that's like a picture from like a Walmart knife that's like a 10-in-1 tool or something, and they're like, "Hey, can you make me one of these?" And it's like, what? Like, I guess, but I feel like you could, one, buy one for way cheaper. Two, I don't really make those things. It's like neon colored. Like, or sometimes I'll just get a message like, what's up? Or just like, hey. Or one guy was like, yo, 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 it's your biggest fan. And then like sent me some memes. And then like, that's it. There's like no context. And so sometimes it's fun and I'll play back. And sometimes I'm just at a loss. I don't even know how to respond.
Wow.
I'm just like, so it's really interesting. I love everybody though. No ill will for anybody. I'm not trying to call anybody out. But just know sometimes I'm just confused and I don't know how to respond.
Well, that's very confusing, so I don't think you can blame you for that. I mean, yo, 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 here's some memes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'd show it to you, but I don't want to call this guy out because he is the coolest guy. He's my number one fan.
All right.
So if he's watching this, I still think about you. Number one fan.
John, do you want to get anything else here?
So recently on Instagram, you saw you singing in a waterfall. Was there any motivation behind that?
It was a lot of fun. I need to stay relevant. That's the biggest motivation because I work so slow, and I'll get on Instagram and I'll see guys that are just pumping out videos and like cool stuff and knives and here's the stuff I'm making, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I gotta stay relevant. I gotta keep riding this wave. And so I try to do some fun stuff. I really want to do like fun videos or just like interesting videos, like go into a little tutorial or something. But then I just have it's really difficult and tiring when you're in the middle of something and you're just covered in muck, and then you're going over to your phone or your camera and trying to adjust it. And two, if I just set my camera up on a tripod, it'll look terrible. And as a former kind of film videographer guy, like I can't stand that. So
Yeah.
I try my best to do fun videos, and that was my opportunity. I was out taking a little vacay, and I had somebody with me, and so I was like, you're going to be the camera person, and we're going to do a fun video because I wanted to do these so bad, but I just have no, real way to do it by myself. So trying, everybody, fans, trying to get them out.
All right. Can you tell us how you got into bladesmithing?
So, theater guy, was going to be an actor, and then I moved into technical theater because I realized actors don't make any money, and they're broke and don't eat. So then fell in love with that, became a carpenter and a welder. And while I was in school in a welding class for theater, I was really bored. And so I was like, forget this, I'm going to make some swords. I'm going to make some prop swords. And because we had a bunch of steel and we had like acetylene torches. And so I was just like, oh man, this is a lot of fun. And I kind of, made these really ugly things that weren't, I had no idea what I was doing. But then I just knew, I was like, that was so much fun. And I kind of just did some grinding and some bending with like an acetylene torch. I was like, I want to know how to do this for real. Like, how did they hit it with a hammer? And so looking back, I'm kind of sad. Like my drive and ambition kind of outwent my research, if that makes sense. Like I would just kind of go and do things without doing much research, or I'd just like look up a quick thing and be like, oh, okay, I get it now. And then like fail miserably. And be like, what's a quench? What's this? And it took me a long time, a lot of trial and error. And looking back, I'm like, man, if I just had somebody to show me some things, or if I'd asked some more questions, I could have started in a much better place. Because it took me a long time to get, to where I'm not like looking back a week later and cringing at my work and being like, oh, this is, oh.
Yeah.
So I I just fell into it, and I was like, I have to do this. And that was right around the time Forged in Fire started. And so I was like, what's this new show? And then that got me hooked, man. I was like, and then people were like, oh, you should be on there. You do it too. And I was like, I don't do it like they do it. And people kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And I didn't even want to do it when I signed up. But I was getting pushed and pushed. And finally, I just kind of gave in. I was like, fine, I'll whatever. Fill out an application. And then so to go from that to winning was like, favorite show. And then you're on the show. And then before you know it, you've won the show. It's crazy.
So if you're making something for yourself, like, is there a particular style of blade that you really like to make, or that you would consider like one of your best, your whatever you think of maybe your signature style of blade that you like to make, or you've perfected to whatever level that is?
Well, first, I don't make anything for myself.
Okay.
I just find I'm not motivated if it's for me. I need it to be at the very least like a gift, or to know that it's going to somebody, to really get me motivated. I finally found out, to my detriment, that I was carrying around like a failed knife for a long time. It was just like this piece of crap. That I was like, oh, I'll carry this one because I'll never sell it. And then people would be like, oh, you're a knife maker? Let me see your knife. And I'd be like, oh, don't judge me. I kept saying the phrase, don't judge me on this so many times that finally I did make myself at least a nice little, oh, there goes my light, everyday carry. Hold on, let me check that before I start a fire. Because I was like, man, that's like my walking advertisement.
Oh, yeah.
So to all you knife makers out there, if you don't like making for yourself, make one good one for yourself and wear it around, because people are going to want to look at it and want to look at it and want to look at it. And if you're like me, you'll be for a year carrying around this piece of garbage because it's for you and you don't care. And then everyone wants to see it. And then they're like, oh, you make these? And it's like, yeah. But as far as signature, for the most part, I kind of make whatever I feel like, unless someone asks, and that's only been recent since the show, that I have a bunch of people asking constantly. But right now, I'm really moving towards kukri knives.
Okay.
I enjoy making them. I like them. They sell really well, and they're just really badass. And so I've really been pushing for those, and people ask for them probably more than anything else. So I think that is hopefully going to be my signature blade. I think my only hesitation there is like, that's Jason Knight's signature blade. A couple other guys I follow who are really good. And so I'm like, oh man, I hesitate to be like, yeah, that's my signature blade.
Well, you can just say it's a blade you enjoy making, I guess.
Yeah.
You could say that.
Right, boom. Oh, I got one right here.
Whoa.
It still has clay on it. Yeah. I haven't heat treated it yet, but I brought it. A little behind the scenes, when it's really hot in the summer, this is the handle right now. I don't do much on the handles, forging wise, because I'll get it to the width, the thickness I want, but then I'm just like, I want to get away from this fire right now. Also, you're kind of burning money. So it's just like, screw that. So sometimes you'll see if I ever post like unfinished things on Instagram, it'll just be like a block for the handle because it's just been so hot lately. I've been like, oh, forget that. Or I can't decide what the handle will be. I just like, I want this blade. I might do something with the handle later, whatever. Just get it out of the way. I just need to get some stuff done.
Do you have any good beginner's tips for people starting out?
I'd say ask a lot of questions. I can't really tell you from who. You can ask me questions if you want. Try to find somebody to ask questions, because I didn't do that. And I felt like I could have started off at a much higher level if I had, and do tons and tons of research. Also, I'd say the biggest thing is just look at the kind of knives that you want your knives to be. You know, you're not copying anybody. Don't think of it like that, but just look at somebody's work and say, oh, those are really nice, and then try to copy that. You know, not like you're trying to copy them, but how do you make it look like that? Because a lot of times you'll see, if you go through and look at a lot of beginners' works, they kind of have the same look about them. The bevels are really low. You know, there's just a little bit of bevel at the end of the blade. They kind of have this rough quality to them. You'll see the angle grinder marks, because that's kind of the most popular way to do it with an angle grinder. And so they all have, you know, everyone kind of has, who's starting out has the same struggle. And I was there too. And so I would say, like, look at your work and then hold it up to someone's that you think is good and say, well, how do I change this to be like that? And really think about it. Like, think about where the bevel goes. Think about how the handle shape is. Think about how things come together. Look at the transitions. Like, really analyze. Because I didn't do that for a long time. I'd just make something and I'd be like, why does this kind of look off? You know, why does it? I don't know. Whatever. I'll make another one. And it took me a while to really focus in on the little aspects and say, okay, well, maybe you need to go like buy a knife, maybe not a super expensive one, or something you can hold and look at and say, oh, okay, here's where the bevel goes. Okay, here's how the slope is. Here's how this is. I'd say that's the biggest thing is analyze your work against someone else's and see, and just to see, because that'll help you open up all new kind of avenues. You know, like, oh, I'm not just going to make it just like theirs, but it'll help say, oh, okay, well, this helps the blade function better when when it's a certain way, certain shape, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, cool. Do you want to be a contestant on Knife or Death?
All right. Not going to toot my own horn again, but I bet they would have me.
That's what I was going to say. You'd probably be really well suited for that show, like coming in and going through that test. I think they'd probably have you for sure. Maybe.
I think I'm worried that I would go on and look foolish, like look like a real idiot. I'd have to practice. You know, this time I couldn't just go in. I've thought about it a lot. We'll see. Is the season still going on?
The first
right
season
now?
is done, I think. No. So they're probably prepping for season 2 now.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll think about it. I'm really close because part of me is like, oh, any exposure is good exposure, right? But then I think back to that first round of Forged in Fire, going, oh my gosh, this could be negative exposure if I really screw up.
Right.
So there's that in the back of my mind, like, oh man, if I go on, just think about this. I'm really confident in my work now, way more than I used to be. Especially since my blade broke on the show, I'm like, how do I make knives indestructible now, right? Mm-hmm. So even though I'm so confident, what if that one little tiny percent, if I go on there and I break a blade on Knife or Death, that would be catastrophic in my mind.
Yeah.
So that's basically all that's keeping me from doing it, and which is silly because it's like such a small percentage of a thing, you know, like don't let that stop you, but it's still just like, oh man, I don't know. I don't know. I'm really leaning towards yes.
Okay.
So we'll see. We shall see in the future.
All right. Have you ever been to the Blade Show?
No, I didn't even know what it was. That's the other thing. I don't really follow, or I try to now, but before, when I was starting out, I didn't look at this stuff. I didn't look at other people's work. I didn't look at other knife makers. I didn't really even know what ABS was or the Blade Show or any of that, which was silly looking back. But so I went on Forged in Fire, and like immediately everyone's talking about, oh, Blade and this maker, and did you see this guy, and did you see this thing, and this thing, and this thing, and this thing, and everybody's talking about it. And I'm just like, I don't know what any of this stuff is. I know nothing. I don't. What are you guys even talking about? Who is that person? What's that thing? I don't know. So I really wanted to go this year, which is a shame because it wasn't that long after my episode aired, so it would have been, kind of riding that wave of popularity. It probably would have been best, but I didn't make it. I was out of town. And looking back, I wouldn't have had anything to take with me.
Oh. Okay.
Not that I would sell anything, but I'd still want to maybe take a few things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I'm taking them to Blade, they got to be, super perfect. So next year, I'm hoping that one, that I'll go, and two, right now I'm working on a replica of the Kabyle Flyssa.
Oh, okay.
Like a replica / better. So I'm hoping I can take that. And maybe a couple other really signature, super nice pieces next time.
Cool.
Nice.
And who knows? Maybe I'll be on Forge and Fire again. Who knows?
Yeah, they do bring back champions to do the contest of champions.
I know. Oh man, that would be so nerve-wracking.
I was gonna say maybe we'll see you at Blade Show next year. We're considering going ourselves. Hopefully, we'll have some experience with something by that point. But
or just walk around as
just to experience it. I think as
noobs.
fans we might check it out. So we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. And your guys' show will probably have blown up, and you'll be millionaires, and you can walk around. And
million pesos.
I've got a couple good friends that just started kind of a podcast, not like this. It's a comedy, anyway. But so I joke with them all the time, hey, you guys are you guys famous yet?
Well, we had Jason Knight.
I saw that.
He contacted us out of the blue. When we had 10 followers on Instagram and 8 subscribers on YouTube, and he messages me and he goes, "What are you guys doing here? What is this?" And I was like, "We're doing wrap-ups of Forge and Fire." He goes, "Do you want to do an interview with me?" I'm like, "Yes, right now, let's do it." And then when he did the interview with us, it was we got a couple hundred extra followers on Instagram. 50 subscribers now, on YouTube. So we're by no means big compared to other YouTubers and stuff, but it's more than we were before he came along and offered to give us that interview out of nowhere. So he helped us out quite a bit.
Yeah, I did see that, and I was like, "Oh wow!" This. I was gonna do it anyway, but I was browsing through it just as quick as I could, and I was like, "Wow, they got Jason Knight on there! Man, that's awesome. That's good for you guys." Because I also saw you weren't huge.
Yeah.
So I was pumped for you all. Man, they got him on there this early. Hopefully this thing builds.
Yeah, we've been having good feedback, and we'll see how it goes.
And it's not about being superstars either. It's if you enjoy doing it, keep on keeping on. For sure.
We like watching it. We like talking about it, and
hopefully we're gonna actually getting our hands dirty. Once we start taking some lessons.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all we got for questions. So, Collin, thank you very much for coming on and talking with us. And
I have something. So
all right.
Dan Rather has a show that he does. He interviews a lot of musicians and stuff, and he ends his interviews and he says, "What's the one question I should have asked that I didn't?" What do you think?
Interesting.
What did we cover? Oh, you should ask me if I'm free Saturday night. If you're a real fan, come on. We got to keep this going. No, please don't, everybody. I love everybody. But no thank you in advance. You're beautiful. You'll find love, I promise.
Well, with that, I think that's a good ending point for the episode. So, again, Collin, thank you for coming on with us and sitting and going through the whole episode wrap-up with us. You're the first contestant to do a full wrap-up with us, so we appreciate it. And
all right.
Thanks, everybody, for watching or listening to the podcast. Remember to subscribe and like all that good social media stuff. We're there. Find us. Collin, your Hippo Head Forge on Instagram, I think, or Hippo's Head.
Hippo Head Forge.
Hippo Head.
Instagram, Facebook. There's a website. I don't really update that because it's confusing. but you can check that out too, I guess.
Right.
Hippoheadforge.com.
Cool. Cool. So again, thanks everybody for watching, and we'll catch you in the next episode. So thanks. Bye bye.
All right. Thanks, guys.